They fined me for building peace on my own land, said my dock was aesthetic misconduct. I built a platform for fishing. They acted like I was summoning Poseidon. And when HOA President Sharon Buckley showed up with her pink notice and gold-plated ego, I knew I'd hooked something bigger than a trout. What came next? Let's just say it wasn't in her little HOA handbook. Hit the comments and tell me what's the dumbest power thrip you've seen in HOA go. Oh, wait. Let's rewind. I'm Dale Mercer, retired trail worker, proud owner of 1.3 acres of Montana bliss, and builder of a handmade dock called Stillwater. I didn't name it that to be poetic. I named it that because for the first time in my whole damn life, I felt calm. Cedar beams, hand-sanded railings, and a view that could lower your blood pressure better than a yoga retreat. It took me 2 years of on and off work, mostly in the early mornings when the air still smelled like pine and second chances. Enter Sharon Buckley, HOA president and full-time fun sponge. She showed up unannounced, marching across my lawn like she was claiming new territory for the queen. She held a hot pink notice like it was the Declaration of Neighborhood Obedience. I looked up from carving my initials into the final beam, and she hit me with it. Mr. Mercer, you are in violation of Article 4, Section 9, unauthorized aquatic extensions. I blinked. Aquatic extension? Lady, it's a dock, not the Death Star. I told her politely that my dock was built entirely within the boundary lines of my deeded property, that I had checked permits, complied with environmental regs, even double-checked the zoning maps. But logic to Sharon was like garlic to a vampire. She sniffed, adjusted her designer sunglasses, and said, "It's not about boundaries, it's about community harmony, and this dock disrupts the view." I glanced behind her at a neighbor's plastic flamingo army and inflatable Santa on a jet ski. Right, harmony. Then she dropped the fine $500 0 cents per day, like she was charging me rent for my own backyard. I asked what part of my legally owned land required her approval. Her smile turned colder than my freezer during elk season. The HOA has standards, Mr. Mercer, and that dock does not meet them. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. Sharon didn't just want a community. She wanted a kingdom, and every mailbox flower, and wooden plank had to bow to her will. Now, I'm not a confrontational man. I prefer silence over shouting, fishing over filing. But when someone threatens your peace and calls it a visual disruption, you either roll over or you start reading the fine print like your freedom depends on it. And in my case, she thought I'd built a dock. What I really built was leverage. She just hadn't read the footnotes yet. Want to see what happens when a clipboard queen pokes the wrong bear? Sharon Buckley once reported a hummingbird feeder for promoting unfair bird advantage. So, yeah, subtlety wasn't her love language. She believed in symmetry, silence, and HOA supremacy, preferably in that order. And my little dock? It was a nail sticking out of her spreadsheet of perfection. Naturally, she brought the hammer. 2 days after the fine, she returned with a camera that probably cost more than my truck. She was crouching in the bushes like a wildlife photographer, except the only thing she was stalking was untreated cedar. I watched from the kitchen as she snapped photo after photo of my dock, from every angle imaginable. If dock shaming were a sport, Sharon would have gone pro. She even brought a yardstick and started measuring shadows. You'd think the thing was leaking secrets to a foreign government the way she documented it. Then came the gossip. You know that special kind of neighbor whisper, starts with, "I'm not one to talk," and ends with a story that makes your jaw drop? That's how I found out Sharon wasn't always the benevolent queen of pine-scented tyranny. Word had it she once ran the PTA in some suburb like a one-woman regime, until she drove a young teacher into early retirement for daring to schedule a field trip on a Tuesday. The district settled. Sharon vanished, and like all exiles, she reinvented herself in a new land. Ours. So Pine Grove Ridge became her redemption arc, her therapy. And the HOA? That was her new stage. Every lawn regulation, mailbox height restriction, and paint color palette wasn't about the neighborhood, it was about rebuilding her reputation, one threatened fine at a time. That's when it hit me. My dock didn't violate her rules, it violated her narrative. She couldn't control it, and that made it dangerous. Sharon, unauthorized structure was just HOA speak for thing I don't like. Later that week, I caught her mid-sneak on the side of my property, crouched behind my rose bushes like a surveillance possum. When I asked what she was doing, she stood up slowly and said, "I'm conducting an informal visual audit. You wouldn't understand." "Ma'am, you're holding a tape measure and a laser pointer like you're scanning my soul." I told her calmly, "That dock is mine. It brings peace." She sniffed and said, "Peace is no excuse for violating standards." That night, as I sat staring at the dock, I realized I wasn't mad about the fine. I was mad because someone like her thought they could reclassify my happiness as a violation. That's when motivation replaced annoyance. I grabbed my old folder of land records and opened to a section I hadn't looked at in years. If Sharon wanted a war, I wasn't going to scream. I was going to research. She called it non-compliant woodwork. I called it therapy you can stand on. And she was about to step in something she couldn't laminate. Stick around. Next up, we see what happens when you mix bylaws with bad math and a man who knows his easements. Nothing says psychological warfare like a PowerPoint with clip art arrows accusing your dock of economic terrorism. I walked into the emergency HOA meeting with one goal: sit quietly, say nothing, and watch Sharon Buckley tie her own noose with decorative font. She greeted the room like a game show host who just discovered a neighbor's mailbox was half an inch too tall. "Thank you for joining tonight's discussion on property value preservation," she chirped, like she wasn't about to drop a PowerPoint titled Dockageddon. Slide 1, a grainy photo of my dock, annotated with more red arrows than a Black Friday sales flyer. Slide 2, a made-up graph showing an imaginary 17% drop in nearby property values, labeled Before Dock/After Dock. Slide 3, a map with my dock circled like it was ground zero for moral decay. She clicked through the slides like Vanna White, but with the emotional warmth of a meat thermometer. I stayed silent, because watching your enemy oversell a lie is more satisfying than interrupting it. Sharon launched into jargon about aesthetic conformity and community integrity erosion, and when someone dared ask if the dock was on public land, she snapped, "It's irrelevant. The emotional impact of unauthorized structures cannot be measured in square feet." Folks started shifting in their folding chairs. Doubt was cracking through the surface like ice under summer boots. That's when I stood up and pulled out my folder, battered, coffee-stained, but blessed by bureaucracy. I unfolded zoning permits with official stamps so old they still smelled like faxes. I dropped a 1992 site map onto the table like I was laying down a royal flush. "And here's your square footage. And here's your square truth." Mike Dawson, the one board member with actual wiring in his brain, looked it over and muttered, "Well, this dock's legit." Sharon's smile shrank like a vinyl seat in July. Then came the murmurs, not loud but deep, the sound of homeowners realizing they'd been fed fertilizer in a PowerPoint wrapper. Nancy Green leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Didn't she approve Todd's ceramic flamingos?" Sharon tried to redirect with one final slide: projected visual pollution over time. I kid you not, she actually tried to quantify ugliness with a bar graph. By then, even her loyal followers looked like they were calculating escape routes. I sat back down, calm, quiet. No applause, no mic drop, just a man with permits and patience. Sharon, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. Her clicker hand trembled, her voice cracked on neighborhood wellness. And Mike, he folded his arms and stared at her like someone finally turned the porch light on. He brought a slideshow, I brought receipts. And next, I'd bring the law hit that like button if you've ever seen a petty tyrant fold under a real map, and don't go far. Next time, she brings the bulldozer. They came at 5:30 a.m. with a backhoe, a clipboard, and the emotional sensitivity of a frying pan. I woke up thinking I was in a construction site or a war zone for wooden infrastructure. Through the foggy kitchen window, I saw orange cones, yellow vests, and the cold stare of a machine operator who looked like he'd been told he was demolishing a meth lab. And in the middle of it all, Sharon Buckley, wearing a scarf that screamed dictator chic, and holding her phone up like she was filming a music video titled Death of a Doc. The lead guy gave me a nod like I was the pizza delivery guy instead of the owner of the structure they were currently destroying. "Emergency waterline has it," he mumbled. "We got orders." I shouted, "That's my dock!" He didn't even flinch. That bulldozer moved like it had a grudge, yanking the first support beam out like it owed him money. Sharon, meanwhile, zoomed in and said, "Make sure it's unrepairable." Her voice had the glee of a kid popping bubble wrap, if the bubbles were someone else's dreams. I sprinted outside in my sleep shirt, waving permits and dignity. "You can't do this! That dock is mine!" Sharon didn't even blink. She just said, "Emergency protocol trumps personal preference, Mr. Mercer. You should have followed the rules." I looked down just in time to see my carved nameplate, Still Water, snap in half like a wishbone. 8 months of hand sanding, measuring, and sweat turned into floating debris in under 12 minutes. Each crack of wood felt like a punch in the gut delivered by bureaucracy wearing yoga pants. The crew packed up like it was just another Tuesday. Sharon gave one final smirk and left with her phone still recording. She thought she'd won. What she didn't know? That phone, still rolling, had picked up everything. Every illegal instruction, every smug threat, every laugh. She recorded her own indictment with the enthusiasm of a true narcissist. I may have lost the dock, but what she handed me? Oh, that was evidence, wrapped in petty and delivered with 1080p clarity. I stood in the muddy ruin of my quiet place, soaked with morning dew and outrage. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about leverage. See, that dock wasn't just cedar and screws. It was mine. And Sharon? She just bulldozed a bridge and bulldozed her alibi. She thought she'd silenced me, but her own phone was about to do the shouting. Tap that subscribe button. Next time, we find out what happens when you destroy the only legal access point to a lake. Spoiler, the HOA's about to need swimming lessons. If karma had blueprints, they'd look a lot like my old property survey. I was digging through a box of old trail maps and warranty deeds the morning after the dock demolition, still half covered in sawdust and spite, when I found it. Page 7, small print, dated in ink older than Sharon's fake eyelashes. Turns out, when this subdivision was developed, my lot was granted the only legal access easement to Mooncliff Lake. The rest? Wetlands. Protected. Untouchable. Not even a lawn flamingo allowed. I blinked, reread it, then laughed so hard I nearly choked on my instant oatmeal. Sharon hadn't just destroyed a dock. She'd destroyed the only bridge to the community's summer joy. That dock wasn't just mine. It was everyone's access point. And now, she'd effectively locked 47 families out of the lake they'd taken for granted like free coffee in a bank lobby. So, I walked to the edge of my property, hammered a new wooden sign into the dirt, and in bold black letters wrote, "No dock equals no lake access per legal easement 349 to A." By that evening, 3 people had stopped to read the sign. Nancy Green asked if it was a prank. I said, nope, just a little reminder that the bulldozer took more than planks. The following day, the BBQ committee canceled their annual lakeside cookout. The swim team postponed practices indefinitely. And Sharon? She was busy hiring landscapers to install stone benches near a lake nobody could legally reach anymore. It was like building a porch on a doorless house. Kids started moping. Dads started grumbling. Retired veterans began forming porch single councils. The HOA Facebook group went from recipe sharing to passive-aggressive finger-pointing in record time. And Sharon? Oh, she doubled down. sent out a newsletter titled "Waterfront Improvement Underway," complete with photos of her next project, a scenic archway made of recycled HOA fines. Meanwhile, my inbox filled with quiet thank you notes and a few urgent requests to fix what she broke. The irony marinated like brisket in July. While she held her victory parade, I watched the community realize they'd traded lake access for ego landscaping. No one could fish, no one could paddle, and Sharon, she'd paved paradise and put up a seating area with no legal footpath. She'd destroyed my dock, but she'd just stranded her whole kingdom, and the water, still mine. Hit like if poetic justice makes your day, and stay tuned. Next up, we meet the one person Sharon can't bulldoze, a retired ranger who remembers everything. Sharon spent $9,200 0 cents on flower beds for a lake no one could legally reach. It was performance art at this point. She called it a revitalization of community spirit, but it looked more like an HGTV special for ghosts. She had contractors installing arched trellises, engraved stepping stones, and a butterfly garden, all positioned elegantly in front of an invisible wall made of law. You know, the kind of place where butterflies land just long enough to file a lawsuit. Meanwhile, I kept my mouth shut and my camera rolling. Every stone they laid, documented. Every trench they dug through, protected wetland, time-stamped. The state had environmental regs so strict you needed a permit to sneeze in the cattails, and Sharon was out here laying irrigation like she was terraforming Mars. She wasn't just ignoring the law, she was high-kicking over it in tap shoes made of... Parents began grumbling louder. No lake meant no kayaking. No dock meant no lifeguard sign-ups. The community newsletter tried to cover the chaos with a sunflower border and the phrase, "Change brings opportunity." Yeah, Sharon, so does a lawsuit. When I saw two kids trying to fish from the playground slide because their dad just needed to get out of the house, I knew the tipping point was near. Enter Nancy Green, sweet, retired teacher turned suburban insurgent. She'd had enough. She started circulating a handwritten petition demanding transparency and lake access solutions. Mike Dawson, our electrician turned moral compass, decided to help. That man doesn't do drama, he does receipts. Literally. He leaked Sharon's beautification expenses to the entire HOA mailing list. Let's just say seeing $438 0 cents for decorative mulch next to no swimming allowed hit different. Suddenly, the Facebook group flipped. Posts changed from "Great job, Sharon" to "Where's this money coming from?" Sharon tried to deflect, of course. At the next meeting, she stood up and declared, "These projects reflect our vision for a unified, elevated community experience." Lady, you built a trail to nowhere and charged us like it was a cruise. She thought HOA money could pave over illegal landmarks. She forgot who drew the map? Drop a like if you've ever watched vanity spend itself into a corner, and stick around because next time, the community gets louder than her flower budget. Her HOA PowerPoint started with a 3D mannered gazebo. It ended with a community revolt and one woman sweating through her turtleneck. Sharon strutted into that meeting like she was pitching investors on a lakeside tech utopia. Her slides featured benches no one could sit on, walking paths no one could legally walk, and one truly haunting animation of dragonflies circling a decorative rock garden. She called it the Lakefront Renaissance, I called it Jurassic Park. Mike Dawson sat beside me with a grin that said, "I've rewired cleaner messes." He gave me the nod, and I rose slowly like someone about to pull the emergency brake on a speeding HOA train. I laid down the easement documents first, the ones clearly stating that my property held the sole legal access point to Mooncliff Lake. Then I unfolded the environmental protection maps, highlighted in lemon yellow, showing how every other route crossed restricted wetlands. And finally, I played the audio. Sharon's voice crackled through the speaker. "Make sure it's unrepairable. That's an order." The room went dead silent. Not metaphorically. You could have heard a squirrel hiccup. The board members stared at her like she'd just confessed to clubbing a bald eagle. Nancy Green gasped. One woman dropped her pen. A teenager in the back whispered, "Damn." Sharon tried to recover. She stood, shaky, and said, "That audio was taken out of context. I was referring to community safety." That's when Mike Dawson stood up, arms crossed like a bouncer at the gates of karma. "We're not here to vote on gazebos. We're here to vote on whether we trust a leader who used bulldozers like scissors and treated facts like optional seasoning." He motioned to the board. "I call for a vote to remove Sharon Buckley as HOA president effective immediately." The hands went up like popcorn. 14-1. Even the one no looked more like a pity vote than real loyalty. Sharon's jaw clenched so tight I thought she might crack a molar. Her clipboard quietly sat down. Her smile finally cracked like an overbaked pot roast. And me? I just sat there sipping from my thermos, enjoying the taste of overdue justice. Her clipboard was revoked. Her smile finally cracked, and I still hadn't cashed in the best part. Hit like if watching power implode feels better than coffee, and come back for the finale, because next time, I put the dock back and renamed the lake myself. I didn't raise my voice, I just raised a new dock, and charged HOA market rate for every plank. Turns out justice doesn't always need a gavel, sometimes it just needs an invoice. After the vote ousted Sharon and the last PowerPoint slide finally died a merciful death, the board approached me with something rarer than a humming HOA. An apology. Mike Dawson handed me a check request form and said, "We'd like to fund the rebuild, full cost, your specs, our regrets." I said sure, but only if the new dock had one addition, a sign. Not a warning, not a rule, just truth. Stillwater Dock, community access restored. I carved it myself, same cedar, same font as the original nameplate she'd split like a bad hair decision. I even stained it with lake water and a dash of petty. Watching that sign go up felt like reinstalling the soul of the neighborhood, plank by poetic. Meanwhile, Sharon Buckley packed her leadership essentials and listed her house, below market. Quietly. No farewell party, just one Facebook post that read, "Moving on to new challenges." Translation, I'd destroyed a dock, a reputation, and $9,200 0 cents worth of mulch, and now I have to explain that to Zillow. Last I heard, she's somewhere in Florida, probably terrorizing a condo board over flamingo placements. Back in Copper Ridge, something funny happened. People started helping each other again. The oversight committee formed, comprised of folks who knew the difference between beautification and bulldozing. The lake became what it always should have been, a place to connect, not control. And me? I don't fish as much anymore. I mostly sit at the edge of that dock and watch the kids jump off it like it was never gone. You see, the dock came back stronger. Sharon didn't. And the neighborhood? It remembered who really built the bridge, not just the wooden one, but the one between neighbors, between trust and fairness. The lesson? It's not about yelling louder. It's about knowing the law, knowing yourself, and knowing when to let your actions do the talking. Or, in this case, floating? Final words? A bridge doesn't just connect land. It connects people. And sometimes, justice floats. If this story floated your boat, hit that like button. If you've ever battled a clipboard tyrant, drop your tale in the comments. We read every HOA horror story. And don't forget to subscribe, because next week we're diving into the saga of the HOA that banned porch swings. Yep, real story, real unhinged. Because around here, justice ain't loud. It creaks like cedar and lasts forever.